Hello everyone, and welcome back to Todos Santos. So this is the very first episode that I've recorded with my new graphics setup. The entire episode is also available in 1440p if you are able to run that. But even if you're not, or if you don't want to for whatever reason, which is fine, you should still be able to benefit from the increased bitrate and resolution running this at 1080p, 720p, 240p, whatever you want. Should look better overall and just a little bit more detailed and nice. So this episode is going to be fairly long, the longest episode of Todos Santos that I've created so far. So I hope that you'll find it interesting enough to stick with me for the entire thing. If not, as always, there are some timestamps down in the description that you can make use of if you so desire. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into this build. One thing I'd like to do as I go forward is sprinkle in some episodes where I focus on creating some of the basic services that the citizens of Todos Santos would require. And one of the most basic services that I could think of was power. So today I'm making a thermal power station. I went into this with essentially no knowledge of how power is created in cities. So I did a little bit of research just to get a basic understanding of the different sources of power, and so what I ended up choosing was a thermal power plant. And basically what that means is that we're going to be burning lots of dead dinosaurs in order to produce steam, in order to move turbines of some sort, which I guess generates electricity. Now, apparently in the real world, oil or petroleum is generally not used as a primary source of fuel for this sort of power station. But because I had these cool assets, I decided to make this a power station that primarily uses oil instead of, for example, natural gas or coal, which are two of the most common fossil fuels for this purpose. And I have these very nice looking tanks. I just love the texture. And they actually work with the industry's DLC, so I can set them to basically be warehouses to store oil, which is kind of nice. And then I have these fantastic power station assets with the green roofs over there that I placed down a bit ago. That's really what we're going to be basing this whole build around, is those very nice assets. And they're so detailed that we really don't have to add too much to the buildings themselves, although of course we will be surrounding them with lots of details. So I got a basic idea for how power plants like this are laid out in my research. But beyond that, in terms of the details I'm going to be putting down, I'm really just trying to come up with my own logic for the sorts of things they would need to consider when building a place like this. For example, these pipes, I figured they would need to actually get the fuel from the tanks into the power plant. So I just have pipes running from each tank and meeting up and crossing the road in that big cluster of pipes there, which is a fantastic network asset. So easy to use, and it just adds so much texture and detail to the build. And then there are things like this little platform, which I've seen things like this in pictures of power plants where you have a bunch of pipes running around like this. There's just like a platform that's raised up, and I don't know, I guess it gives easier access to these network of pipes. Who knows? Somebody probably knows. If you know, let me know. And then we can all know more. But basically I'm just using this sort of detail as an excuse to put down some props and decals and just to vary the landscape a little bit. But I really like that little area. Just looks like a nice kind of industrial thing. And then you might have seen me putting down those valves on the pipes. I just figured they'd want to be able to isolate each tank and each section of pipe in case of some sort of disaster or leak or fire or something like that. Not that anything like that ever happens in Todos Santos, of course. Okay, so while I go in and detail this area, I'll just briefly describe what the sort of layout is, what I was going for from a wider perspective. So I really wanted to make this into really a campus, almost like a sort of area that's self-contained, because obviously they'd want to limit access to who is able to get close to the giant tanks full of flammable material, and, you know, just a place that provides such an essential service that keeps people safe and healthy and, you know, in some cases even alive. So we're going to be, you know, fencing it off and putting in some details that just make it look like a really self-contained area. And I've had this area set aside for quite a while for some sort of port project, obviously, since it's right next to the water. But it's not the area where I want to do the main port, so this is where I decided to do the power plant. And I think it's kind of nice because we end up making its own dock, so it has an area where ships can come in and deliver fuel for the power plant, which I think is pretty cool. And down the shoreline, closer to the downtown, I did do a little bit of a practice run for a port district, I guess, like a cargo port. Unfortunately, I don't have footage of that, but you'll get to see it in the cinematics. And if I do end up doing a little bit of a live update video on what I've done off screen, you'll be able to see it there, and I'll show it off there. Now, as for the actual layout of the power plant, I wanted to include the basic areas that you'd find in a real power plant. So we have the boiler hall, obviously, which is the green-roofed building over there. That's basically where all the magic happens, where they turn dinosaurs into electricity. And then, of course, you have the fuel storage. And then what I just made just a few seconds earlier was I think it's called the transformer yard or something like that. Basically, that's where you can send the electricity that you've generated into the electric grid and direct it all across the city. And then, of course, we're going to be doing a few other things, like there's an administration area and this security gate where I'm currently building. This is where they'd turn away anyone who was not authorized to enter the premises here. And of course, I'm just going to be going in and adding some generic industrial-looking details to try to give it a little bit of life and make it look like it's a real place where real people go and do stuff. So I wanted the infrastructure to make sense and to look, nice and realistic, like it's fairly well maintained, because they'd want to keep the flow of fuel and people in and out of here very smooth and safe, obviously, because of the importance of this facility. So I'll be paying quite a bit of attention to that as we move through the video. It's not just the human citizens of Todos Santos that float. It's the bovine ones as well. Anyway, I'm getting started on this administration area for the whole power plant here. Just doing a very simple parking lot roads parking lot. It's kind of handy. You can go in there with node controller where the actual parking lot road network meets up with whatever road network you're connecting it to. And you can tick the sharpen corners option, and it will turn it into this nice square junction. It just looks a little bit more realistic and saves a little bit of space as well. And I wanted to put this parking lot at a bit of an angle just to fit the hill behind it, because the whole road network of the power plant here and the dock as well is at a different angle than the hill. So I just wanted to kind of have this in-between area that transitions between the two angles. And then just to be consistent with the fuel storage tanks, which have this, I believe it's a vanilla logo. It's called Loimu. I just wanted to put that on the actual power plant there just to bring everything together. Probably should have put it on this administration building that I'm putting down as well, but I think I forgot to do that. I thought this building here had the very official look that I was looking for for this administration building, so I put that down. Plus it fit nicely, and I could kind of push it in there between the parking lot and the road. And then I put these automatic door assets that I've been using all over the city, just so I can kind of pick and choose where the entrances to the building are, visually speaking at least. And then I have this second older looking building back there. I figured that would be like the original building that they put down when it was a much smaller power plant back in the day. And they've since added on this extra one that's a little bit more modern, a little bit more interesting. Now, I don't know if I want this to be the only power plant in the city. I think it would be, just for the purposes of having fun, I think it would be a good idea to make something else that helps to provide power for the city, or as maybe like a backup power plant. And I'm putting solar panels down here on top of the administration building for the oil power plant. I'll let you make of that what you will. But speaking of solar panels, it could be fun to do like a solar farm somewhere with, I don't know if there are good assets for that on the workshop, but I think that could be kind of an interesting idea for something on the outskirts of the city once we get there. Or maybe something like a nuclear power plant could be a lot of fun. It would probably be similar to this build in many ways, but there would be some differences, and it would be just cool to do a nuclear power plant, because I've never done that outside of just placing down the vanilla game's nuclear power plant. Or there could be a wind farm, or maybe another thermal power plant that uses coal or something, and that would lead to some differences in the build. Let me know what you think of those ideas, or if you have ideas of your own, or if you think this is enough power for the city and you don't want to see any more power sources built. Okay, I'm going to stop waffling. I'll be back in just a moment. I'm going to come back and finish that administration area at a later point in the episode. But for now, I'm going to start putting down some details just to sort of define the limits of the area. Whoa, okay. And just kind of adjusting it to better fit the environment and again, just kind of solidify that look of it being a self-contained area that I talked about earlier. Now you might have seen those power lines there crossing the road. That's another reason I chose to set this build here, is that we just kind of naturally had those power lines already there. If you remember back to episode number 21, those were the ones that went up and down the big hill that we made. So I thought this would be a good point because it basically runs in a straight line from that over to the transformer yard there. I wasn't exactly sure how to actually run the power lines into the substation. So if you have any information about how that works from a practical point of view, let me know, and I may make adjustments. I tried something with running power lines without the actual posts that hold them up from one transformer to the other, and it didn't really work that well. As you can see, I had to cover it up with some ploppable grass, and then the fence ends up sinking into the ground because of just the way the power lines interact with the landscape. So that's kind of annoying, and I basically end up deleting that and just settling for having no connection between the power lines and the substation. Anyway, like I mentioned before, one of the benefits of building in this area is that we get to have a dock area for boats to come in and deliver fuel. So just like usual, I come in and put down a key and then put down a road underwater just to make sure the landscape is nice and uniform and is completely made of square angles instead of having this ugly lump of landscape just sticking out at the bottom, which is absolutely unacceptable. Now, one of the things I really couldn't find any details on in my research is how they actually, in a port power station like this, how they actually get the fuel from the ship into the tanks or into the power plant. So I just kind of made it up, and I wanted to use more of this very cool pipe network asset. So I basically have it look here like it's raised up to go across the road, and then it goes down to ground level, just because they wouldn't necessarily want to spend the money to keep it raised up like that if they didn't need to. So it's only raised where it has to be. And then I just tried to integrate it into the building a little bit and make it look like it's functional in terms of being able to deliver fuel into these areas. And then I just wanted to make this part of the building look a little bit more accessible, like they would need an area there. Uh-oh, flooding. That's not good. Anyway, they'd want an area here where they could get in, and that would be like their access to the pipe network, I guess, for maintenance or, checks or that sort of stuff. So I just clipped that building in there just to give this particular area of the building a little bit more detail. By the way, I love the stairs that run up the side of the building there. I think that looks so cool and very industrial. These assets are just fantastic. I mean, I barely need to do anything just to make them look nice and detailed and industrial and just overall like a power plant. And then I tried to color code these smaller pipes here. I don't know exactly what the different colors mean in real life, but I'm imagining that white is where they pop up out of the ground to cross the road or whatever, and then red is when they're right down near the ground, just so you can see it more easily when you're walking around, so you don't trip over them or run into them with a vehicle of some sort, which would not be good. And then the pipes that connect the tanks up to each other and to the main pipe network are orange, just because I wanted to switch it up a little bit. Okay, now I'm trying to make this area a little bit more friendly to trucks. I mean, I've played the truck sim games. I know how annoying tight turns can be.
First exit. Mind? I'll find a new route.
So I just wanted to widen out those curves a little bit so it's easier for these big tanker trucks to drive around the area here. And I also put these barriers down, again, just to give these tanks a little bit of extra protection. And a bit earlier in the episode, I put down those rural grass road assets, which I love those assets so much. They look so good. And I guess that would be like where they'd drive in their little maintenance vehicles or whatever if they needed to carry supplies out or just, go check on the pipes. And I think those add just a nice little bit of detail from above. Because when I've seen aerial pictures of power plants kind of like this one, they seem to have little tracks like that everywhere where, the whole thing isn't necessarily going to be paved over in every instance. So you do have areas of grass that are traffic. And of course, whenever you have traffic, whether it's pedestrian or motorized or whatever, you're going to get the grass worn down, and then there's going to be dirt poking through. I also hid a bunch of 1x1 industrial buildings inside of the generator hall here, and that's just to generate more traffic in and out of this area. Because I really do want it to look like a fairly busy place where there's always something going on. Someone's coming, someone's going. There's, stuff going on here. Okay, the next part of the episode is going to be dedicated to details. And this is where I start diverging from my research and just kind of doing what I think looks cool or seems logical in terms of what they need to have here, or, the way it would be maintained or what have you. For example, I have these patches of grass here. I mean, it seems like that small of an area, they'd probably just pave over the whole area instead of leaving these little patches of grass. But I just wanted to break it up a little bit because it can get really tiresome just to look at this big patch of gray all the time. Even when you put down these classic stain decals like I'm doing now, it just is nice to have a little bit of variation. And as you'll see later in the build, I do not hesitate when it comes to putting down foliage. Of course, if you've seen any of my other videos, you probably know that that was inevitable no matter what I'm building. So yeah, there's going to be some greenery. I don't know how realistic that is in terms of having it right next to a power plant. Maybe there's like a fire hazard that comes along with that next to a building where you're burning oil. I don't know. But we're just going to have to deal with it, and the people of Todos Santos will deal with whatever consequences come from that. Okay, now I'm fencing off this little yard. I figured this would be where they had some storage and where they would take deliveries for things other than the oil, or maybe the oil as well. I don't know. But I just had this big area of empty space, and I wanted to make it look like it was in use. I'm going to come back to that in a second and finish it off. But now I'm hopping over here just to do a similar area on this side, although a little bit smaller, of course. And I guess that's just where they store their trailers, where the big tanks go that the trucks carry in and out. Who knows? My experience with this kind of thing is limited to just conjecture that I've made while playing the truck sim games, like I said before. And now I'm moving back to this yard area here, and just trying to put down a few details, like there's some parking for people who would be working here that don't necessarily want to park in the big parking lot over by the administrative area. And I stumble across this vending machine here, so I just get distracted and go plop that around the entire area because I like how it looks. And then I'm not sure what to fill this big blank space with. So again, I just have some more material here. I had this problem where I would copy and paste a pile of these pallets with sandbags on them or whatever. And then even though I didn't have the follow terrain option ticked and move it, every time I would copy and paste it more than once, if that makes sense, it would completely lose its elevation and just go back to ground level. And it seemed to only happen with that particular asset. Maybe it's because it's a vanilla asset or something. I don't know. It was just kind of strange. And now I'm really delving deep into the recesses of my imagination because I don't even know what this stuff is, but I just like putting these piles of stuff down in industrial builds like this. I don't know if it's like a waste product of some sort, or if it's like they have just a tiny little bit of coal on hand, kind of like the opposite of most coal power plants I saw in my research would have big fields of coal where they'd, scoop it up and send it over to the power plant, and then they'd have, 1 or 2 oil tanks for backup power. Maybe it's like the opposite of that here. I'm not really sure what that stuff is supposed to represent, but let's just call it coal, I guess. Now, just to go along with that theme I talked about before, where we have these paths running around grassy areas like this, I wanted to come in and lay a base with surface painter, just to show where people have walked or where various vehicles have been driven to deliver materials or to deliver people to perform maintenance or that kind of thing. Basically just trying to make them look like desire paths, which is basically paths where people walk naturally when they want to get from point A to point B. And then it just looks a little awkward and a little square looking without adding more detail. So I come in and add patches of this very nice grass asset just to make it look like where people have walked, there's no grass, and where they haven't, the grass has had time to grow up. Although I imagine they probably keep it fairly trim here, just so none of it gets in the way of the operations here. And in the vanilla game with no mods, the grass usually has grass sprites sticking up, but they're kind of ugly little two-dimensional things, so I just turn those off, and I like to add my own grass manually so I can control the way it looks And, that way also I don't have sprites sticking up where I don't want them if I do just want a big open field of a very short grass. Like if you had a big park or something, you might have very closely trimmed grass, and the grass sprites would take away from that look, in my opinion. And now I'm currently making this place look quite overgrown, which, I don't know, it looks kind of cool. I like to think that here in Todos Santos, they have trouble keeping the forest at bay, and the forest just kind of naturally encroaches on whatever they're doing, and everyone in town has just come to accept that there's no keeping the shrubbery at bay. So they don't even try to resist anymore, and they just embrace it, and they're better off for it, as far as I can tell. And I'm doing the exact same thing over here that I did by the storage tanks with the transformers, because again, you'd probably have people going in and out of this area all the time, doing maintenance, because this is the main source of power for most people in the city, so you'd want to make sure that everything is always up to scratch and is functioning well. And I'm just trying to make sure that there are no areas left untouched in this build. When I do a build that covers an area like this, I'd like to finish the area and not have to come back later and fill in any gaps. So I just have these rocks right on the end of the key on both ends. You might be able to see at the bottom left of screen now, there's that little port area I did. There's a little bit of a neighborhood attached to it. I almost wish that I had made an episode out of it. That was one of the first builds I did when I came back from taking a long break from the game, and I just wasn't really in the video making mood, if that makes any sense. So I just don't have footage of it, which is unfortunate. But like I said, I would be happy to show it off in a kind of tour video of the things I've done off screen, which for the most part are not unique. I've shown you most of the unique things I've done in the city and made episodes out of them. And that's really the only area that I really regret not recording me building it. But anyway, that's beside the point now, and we're moving on and putting some decorations down on the substation. Again, it might be a little silly to have all this grass here. It seems like they'd want to keep it from getting too wild, just in case any of the foliage manages to interrupt the functioning of the transformers here. I don't really know how that sort of thing is managed in real life. If you do, let me know, and if that's not really appropriate, I will send some guy in there with a lawnmower to take care of it. I do really like this natural area here, though, right at the end of the key. I just kind of like how it transitions from just the bare minimum amount of grass sticking up to the palm trees and the shrubbery and the rocks there. I just think that looks really nice, and it's a aesthetically pleasing and fun to build way to transition from a developed area just down to the natural shoreline, which obviously we're going to have a lot of that sort of thing in this city. So it's probably good that I like how that looks, because I'm going to be implementing it quite a bit. Okay, now I'm putting down these dock assets. This is, I think, the weak point of the build is the actual dock area, because I use these dock assets, the same ones I used back in the cruise ship episode, and I think it looks a little bit too nice, a little bit too clean, and maybe I should go back and put some details on top of it, because it's a little bare. Would like it to look a little bit more industrial. But I really struggled to get it to fit in with the road. As you can see here, like the way the sidewalk sticks up is kind of annoying. But then because of that curve there, I'm not really able to raise the docks up to cover that up, because then it covers up some of the road as well. I think I could have given that a little bit more TLC. Maybe I'll come back and do that at a later time. Like I said before, I do not want to leave any gaps with this sort of build, so we're moving on from the power plant itself, although we will be coming back later to do a few more details. But for now, we're moving to the area surrounding it, just to make it look nicer and blend it into the environment, and make sure there are no ugly, empty spaces. I wanted to add a little variation to the wharf here. Obviously, there wouldn't be space for actual ships to fit in here because of the bridge that comes over here. So I just wanted to make this into a little bit of a pedestrian area where you could go down to the industrial zone and just walk along the shoreline. Sounds like a lot of fun. So I just use these retaining walls for keys, which I think looks really nice. And it has the fence there just so no one goes falling into the ocean, which I've mentioned several times now is generally not good for well-being. So I'm imagining that kind of like the old docks that we made a couple episodes ago, that this used to be a dock that was functional and used for cargo or something like that, and now has been repurposed just to be this pedestrian area. So that would be the explanation as to why there's this different sort of key asset here, would be that it hasn't been updated to modern industrial standards since it's just used for a pedestrian area, so they don't need to, have it withstand the wear and tear of having giant oil tankers dock up against it. And I realized this is the perfect place to run the bus line. So I just have a bus stop right here at the end of the quay, and I imagine that would be very popular with the people who spent their days here at the power plant and at the buildings that we're going to place down in a moment. But first, I'm decorating this intersection. I wanted to give them a little bit of a slip lane for all the trucks that are exiting the power plant, just to show a little mercy to them and not force them to turn around that sharp corner there. And that's the sort of build, just that little slip lane there, that the node controller mod just makes so easy. It's just a breeze now to get a good looking slip lane, which in my opinion should just be a base feature of any city builder, at least if your intent is focusing on detail and realism and that kind of thing, is to be able to get nice, smooth looking slip lanes like that. Of course, the same idea applies to freeways as well, with on and off ramps and that kind of thing. But it just feels so good to be able to get that sort of look very easily and very quickly and consistently. And you might have seen there, I pulled the segment of the slip lane there down with Move It, and the node controller mod just lets you push that extra little bit in terms of making angles sharper of these sorts of transitions between roads. And I just love being able to have that flexibility of being able to really push your intersections and other things to the limit. So I think one of the strengths of City Skylines is that it really allows you the freedom to make whatever you want, to make it realistic or not realistic, but especially on the realistic side, it gives you the tools to do that if you want, especially when you're able, of course, to add all these mods and stuff. But even just the base game, I think, gives you the freedom and the flexibility that is sorely lacking in so many different games. Now, I think it's bordering on pointless to speculate about game sequels about which we have absolutely no information, but I hope at least that if they are working on a second City Skylines, they really lean into its identity as a city builder where you can go in and detail it and make weird things and just really do whatever you want with the tools. So I feel like if they can find the right balance between aesthetics and detailing and the way your cities look, without sacrificing gameplay, I think that could be a really good niche to go for them. I mean, I don't think the game necessarily even needs a sequel because of how much content we have from modding and how much content we continue to get from modding, even, 6 or 7 years after the game has come out. We're still getting, some of the best mods for the game have been released within the last year or two, which is crazy. But if they are working on a sequel, which I think generally the way successful games go, I think they probably are, or at least will be at some point soon. I hope that they don't just ignore what we all enjoy about the game, both in terms of the base game and also what we're able to do with mods. So that's my very uninteresting opinion on the direction they should take. And I'm tempted here to touch on the DLC and what I think about that, but I only have a few of them, so I don't think I'm really qualified to say anything comprehensive about it. I will say I'm not a big fan of the DLC overload that there is. It feels like to me, like if there are so many features that the game is missing that can be effectively done with DLC, it seems like it would just be creatively more productive to work on a second game. I suppose that would be a reason to do a second City Skylines, in addition to just improving its performance. And I don't know anything about the technical side of things, but I assume there are things that could be done if they did want to take it in the direction of that we've taken it as modders, and they would be able to do that in a second game more easily. And they would also be able to bring it to console players, which would be great, because then they wouldn't have to be left out of all this cool detailing and then all the cool stuff we get to make with mods. And then of course there's also just the aspect of cost. I mean, the DLC are quite expensive when they're new, pretty cheap when they're on sale. I've only ever bought them on sale personally, I don't even buy games at full price for the most part, but I definitely don't buy DLC at full price. But, despite the fact that they go on sale very often, that's beside the point. It's the principle of, do you really expect it? I mean, it almost turns it into like a subscription game. Every few months you have to pay a certain amount to be able to get the new update or whatever. And obviously there's always a little bit of content that you get for free with the DLC updates, which I suppose is good in that it keeps the game alive in that sense, that there's always motivation to keep the game up to date. But I just think overall, it's not the right direction. It's not very accessible for many people to be able to get the DLC, and especially to console players who don't even have access to mods, which can so often replicate what the DLCs do. And the only reason this is even on my mind right now is the whole Paradox launcher thing, which I know is probably old news to most of you who are watching this. But I'm just, I've been gone from the City Skylines sphere for a while, so it's new to me. But if you don't know what that is, like if you don't actually play the game or whatever, it's basically an update that was forced on every player that when you hit play game, or even just open the City Skylines executable, it launches an additional program instead of just taking you straight to the game's main menu. And basically its purpose is to advertise DLC, at least as far as I can see. You're welcome to make a different judgment for yourself, of course. And as far as I know, pretty much every player hated it, but nothing was done about it. Nothing was changed. Again, I've been out of the loop, so maybe I missed something with that, but to me it just kind of signals, what they see this game as right now. So I think that's how it relates to the next City Skylines, if such a thing will ever exist, is that, I just hope they don't have that sort of attitude. I think if they have a good idea and they're able to implement it, they should just include it in the next game. And hopefully there will be no room for DLC, or no need for DLC, because they'll already have an even better game than they made the first time around. And I'll end the rant here, but if you're interested in setting up your game so that you can skip the Paradox launcher, some absolutely wonderful person on Steam has posted a guide on how to do that, and I will link that in the description down below. It's quite easy to do, so don't hesitate if you want to skip that annoying thing, and you can uninstall the Paradox launcher program from your computer once you're done, so you'll even free up some space. Okay, and now back to the build, which has unfortunately flown on by while I've been ranting. So I'm moving on to this little road that connects the port I built off screen to what we did this episode, to the power plant. And I'm just putting in a few details. I really like this area. I like the kind of grimy looking retaining wall, and it just looks like the kind of road that you'd get in an industrial area where there's no room for development. So you just have this not awful road or awful area, but just kind of a very utilitarian spot. Although there is that strip of grass on the median, which is nice, and there's a little bit of a nice natural area there with some coconut trees and grass and rocks. Good stuff. And now, just to reinforce the fact that the dock is the weakest part of this build, I come back and do this little water intake, which is one of the parts of a power plant that I forgot to mention, is that they're going to need some form of cooling, and if it's on the water, it's going to be water, and they're going to suck in water and use that for cooling. So I just have this little, very simple water intake here. Probably could have given it a little bit more TLC, a little bit more detail. Maybe someday I'll come back and spruce up this dock a little. And now, as you might have guessed, we are coming back and doing the obligatory lighting pass. So when I've been looking at the city from above, at night at least, it looks a little too blue for my taste. So I'm trying to integrate these older, I can't remember the terminology, but they're whatever gas is used in the light bulb affects the color. Older ones tend to be yellower, newer ones tend to be a little bluer and more like daylight. So I wanted to just put in these yellow ones where I can, especially in areas that are older or more industrial. And really, it's not as much about the realism, although I do care about that, but it's more about just getting variation and kind of consistency within a specific area when you look at it from a distance. So I kind of like having just a variation that's somewhat logical and somewhat consistent. For example, even though most of the city has the newer style, bluer lighting, I think it's kind of nice to have an avenue every once in a while run along through the whole city with some more orangey light. I just think it makes it a little bit more interesting to look at from a distance. And plus it just adds another challenge, another thing to consider when making builds as to what sort of lighting do you want, how frequently do you want the lighting fixtures to be, and yeah, it just gives you another color to consider on your palette. And now check out this line of cruise ships on the left. This is what I'm talking about a couple episodes ago. Ridiculous. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Todos Santos. I absolutely cannot wait to see you on the next one. Bye-bye.